The Necrological Service in honor of the President of the Senate of the 8th Congress, the late Senator Jovito Salonga, is hereby declared open.
The Lord's Prayer will be sung by the Senate Choir. After the doxology, please remain standing for the singing of the Philippine National Anthem.
magiliw, pwersa silamanan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinilang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupig, di ka pasisihin. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bagaw, may dinatang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislat ng watawat ko'y tagumpay na nagbibigay. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng walhati pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mga api, ang namatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Kindly be seated. The Honorable Rene A. Sagisag will now deliver his eulogy.
To all my golden friends present here this morning, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. I am only on a special leave for a few hours to leave Makati Med. So against myself, I'll have to follow two things I learned about delivering a speech. Like a bathing suit, I was told it should be short enough to be interesting and long enough to cover the subject. By force of circumstances, I have first to answer a query I got why I always call the man we honor today in informal settings as uncle. I am told that when I was delivered, my Lola Natalia, first cousin of Lola Dinang, the mother of Uncle Joby, living in the same looban, had to give me milk because my own Lola was barren of milk. Must have been a century ago. And then we probably lost contact because from San Miguel, we moved to what is now known as Santa Cruz in Pasig, maybe 2 barrios apart. And it was only after I became a student that I first read about the roaring debate between two Rizaleños and Chong Sumulong and Jovito Salonga about Saba. And at the time, I agreed totally with Uncle Joby was saying. I'm not so sure where I stand on the issue today if it again crops up. Because after many decades, to me, self-determination is a basic human right. We cannot just let the people, about 2 million native Sabahans, I want to know if they want to be governed really from Manila or on their own or some other capital. Anyway, after I did relatively well in the bar exam, not as well as Uncle did, tying with Pepe Jokno in 1944 for number 1 in wartime years. And a very good friend of his was my boss in the law office and in law school, Dean Feliciano Hover Ledesma. And they would play golf regularly. And so he intimated that he wanted his pamangkin, me, to join him, like many other Rizaleños. But I told the dean, I'm staying with you because I have no yen or desire or ambition to be in politics. To me, my hope and dream was to be a common lawyer helping the common people who are usually underserved, oppressed, etc. And so he let me be until in 1972, he called me one night, September 23. Raul, Rocco, and I were trying to sleep in the house by bayaw of his in Bel Air. And Uncle, what's going on? So I'm here in the Senate. The doors and gates are barred. But even then, we made an implicit fact, followed later or said later by other icons of mine, Pepe Jokno, Tani Tanyada, resist, resist, resist. So, that was how I ended up in human rights lawyering, which was an animal unknown in the legal zoo when I was student. In fact, even when I went to Harvard Law later in the 60s, only 1 or 2 hours maybe on the subject. I remember particularly in Yamashita, where our teachers were teaching us or trying to teach us that Yamashita was not to be blamed for the bombing and the killing of more than 100,000 people south of the Pasig. Because at the time, Admiral Iwabuchi was in command. General Yamashita was effectively cut off. And so when I said how I felt, that Japan had no business visiting us in the first place, to my great surprise, a burst of applause from equally immature students from all over the world. And it was only later on that I understood or tried to understand that command responsibility as a concept must be refined and defined so as not to erase personal liability. Anyway, in 1975, he asked me to sign a message of hope. It was a courageous document when no one wanted to speak. Most every leader or lawyer wanted to be prudent. But that was an imprudent, reckless, daring article. I have lost my copy of it, but I read that from a column of then Raul Pangalangan, that he was a law student who helped distribute it. And then in 1978 came the Laban elections. Senator Jerry Rojas refused to participate. That was a Liberal Party line. But the LP released Ninoy because of the extraordinary circumstances he was in. We had that historic noise barrage of April 6, 1978. That was when I edited Malayang Pilipinas during the election period, continuing what I was trying to do, pamphleteering. The Rizal IVP newsletter was my outlet, and then certain publications of Ruben Canoy, of Federico Pascual, and others supplementing what was distributed by the underground. In December 1985, early on, Uncle Joby called me and said, "Pamangkin." That was how he always called me, Pamangkin, when we talk informally. Ikaw ang napupusuan ni Cory Aquino na maging tagapagsalita niya. But why me? Anyway, I expected her to call me. Then I met Mary Nicolas in Mondragon. Ba't hindi ka ba nagre-report na spokesman? Eh wala pang sinasabi yung Ali. Ikaw naman understood na yun pag he let his wishes expressed. That's supposed to be the order. So I took over, and after a difficult first month, remember, December 19, our 11 petitions to stop the snap falls were junked by the Supreme Court. The majority was more impressive in the classroom. But in the real world, Tihanke, among others, said, let the people decide. It's a sovereign people. It's the ultimate political question. Who will lead us is for the sovereign people, not for the unelected COMELEC, the unelected Supreme Court to decide. That is the same situation we are now. We don't know how the Supreme Court will finally resolve the pending motions for reconsideration, but I will hope they will do the right thing. I mean, whatever it may be. Anyway, the January elections was reset to February 12. And you and I know what happened, validated by Manong Johnny Ponce Enrile, February 22. In Cagayan, I cheated by 300,000 votes for McCoy, which convinced a lot of people that it might be for real. And February 25, in the morning, what I had predicted came true. Hindi ako naging bulaang propeta noon. There would be dancing in the streets. So we went to Club Filipino, little hassle, military wanted it in the camps, Cory wanted it in the civilian area because it's important to drive home the point. Civilian authority always superior to the military. Came that afternoon, I want you to continue to be my spokesman. I had not planned to be in public life even a single minute. So I looked down at my shoes a long, long time. Naku po, nag-alboroto na naman ang ali. Ikaw, isa ka sa nagkumbinsi sa akin tumakbo. Ngayon kailangan ko ang tulong mo, iiwanan mo ko. Yes, ma'am. Same thing the following year. Ting Paterno and I did not want to run either. Pinatawag sino? Mga asawa namin. Oh, iyakan sina Dulce, sina Baby. But in the end, I need your husband. So, naging deal namin, okay, one term lang. When we enter public life together, we live it together. And that was what he did in 1992. But I tried to continue to do what I can because, as I said, on September 16, 1991, borrowing from Ted Kennedy, nung matalo siya ni Jimmy Carter, my closing line was, the work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, and the dream, Uncle Jovi, shall never die. Maraming salamat po.
The Honorable Leticia Ramos-Shihani will now deliver her eulogy.
Mr. Senate President, the members of the late Salonga family, the former members of the Senate, the present members of this sitting Senate, dear friends and colleagues. It is an honor to be asked to speak at this necrological service for our late Senate President, Senator Salonga. I would like to say, as part of my contribution to this ceremony, because I am told we can only speak for 5 minutes, that I knew Jovito Salonga before I ever dreamt to be a member of the 8th Congress of the Senate. I knew him as a young man because we worshiped in the same church, Cosmopolitan Church, where he sought refuge from the Japanese in 1943. Cosmopolitan Church is not far away from here. It is on Taft Avenue. At that time, as a young man, whom the congregation knew secretly as part of the refugee program of the Cosmopolitan Church from the Japanese, Jovi had already an aura of intellectual brilliance and strength of character. Senator Salonga's #1 protector in the Cosmopolitan Church, as his family knows, was Pastor Mary Boyd Stagg, an American, and perhaps the first ever pastor in any Protestant church, the first female pastor of any Protestant church in the Philippines. She had a great Christian faith and suffered greatly because of it. My parents, Narciso Ramos and Angela Valdez, got to know Jovi quite well. because of our family closeness, I asked Jovi to be the ninong of our firstborn son, Ranjit. I will not mention the other accomplishments which Senator Salonga had, because I'm sure the others will speak about it. I just would like to say that it was an honor to be a member of the 8th Congress of the Senate. And aside from helping us to organize our legislative priorities in a tumultuous period of recovery and reconstruction after the dark martial law years, Senator Salonga authored 3 major pieces of legislation: the Code of Conduct and Ethical Standards for Public Officials and Employees, the Anti-Coup d'etat Act, and the Anti-Plunder Act. Perhaps this citation on the occasion of his acceptance of the honorary Doctor of Laws degree given by the University of the Philippines is one of the best summaries of his long and productive life. The UP, in confirming an honorary Doctor of Laws, cited Jovito Salonga, and I quote, for his brilliant career as an eminent political figure, for his unwavering, courageous stand against injustice, oppression, and dictatorship, and for his sterling personal qualities of decency, humility, industry, and moderation. After his retirement from public life, Senator Salonga continued his public service to the Filipino people, concentrating on issues which defined his personal life, which were raising political consciousness and citizens' participation in democratic, non-dictatorial governance and proper legal education, through serving institutions such as Kilos Bayan, Libantayog ng mga Bayani, and Bantay Katarungan. Mahatma Gandhi, when asked what was his greatest accomplishment in life, India's apostle of nonviolence replied, "My life is my message." Or as an artist said in a similar vein, "The singer is the song." Indeed, the life of Compadre Jovi, who translated his principles into daily life with unerring consistency and faithfulness, his life was his message, and the song he sang was composed from his own very life. As we enter the political season in our country, and as cynicism, corruption, transactional politics, and violence dictates the norms of our democracy, the best tribute we can pay in the Senate to Jovito Salonga's exemplary life on this occasion is to remember that one Filipino, through his God-given intellectual brilliance and strength of character, was able to succeed in politics not through money and corruption, but through his faith in God, love of country and his fellow human beings, and service to the nation. Tortured, disabled, at times ridiculed for his simplicity and non-materialistic choices in life, he continued his journey of struggle and hope on the path less traveled. To quote his own words from his memoir entitled A Journey of Struggle and Hope, and I quote, "True love of country is not a short and frenzied burst of emotion, but the tranquil and steady dedication of a lifetime to the cause of genuine independence, individual freedom, and social justice. Independence, like freedom, is never granted. It is always asserted and affirmed. Its defense is an everyday endeavor, sometimes in the field of battle, oftentimes in the contest of conflicting wills and ideas. It is a daily struggle that never ends for as long as we live." And it was indeed the finest moment of our Senate when, as our Senate President, he led in the rejection of the treaty on the U.S. basis. To his surviving children, Steve, Patricia, Victoria, Regina, Ricardo, and Eduardo, we convey our sincerest and heartfelt condolences. May the great soul of Jovito Salonga rest in peace in our Father's bosom. Thank you.
The Honorable Gerson T. Alvarez will now deliver his eulogy.
Senate President, members of the Salonga family, former colleagues, distinguished guests, ako po ay bibigkas sa Tagalog sapagkat si Ka Joey ay isang Tagalog at paminsan-minsan kung siya ay nagpipreside sa Senado ay may mga tinatanong siya. Minsan sabi niya, ano ba ibig sabihin ng debonair? At bigla ko siyang sinagot, sabi ko ay magilas. Gusto ko sanang sabihin na si Ka Jovi ay isang magilas na tao, hindi lamang lalaki. Ngunit kulang yung pupuring yan. Yung nakakalam sa kanya ng mga matatalinos batas, alam na siya isang malalim na mambabatas. He was an erudite scholar. Ako'y bata pa noon nung mahawakan ko kanyang aklat sa conflict of laws. Halos hindi ko maintindihan. Kaya ginawa ko, nagpunta ako, isang kongresista, at hinunta ko siya. Naintindihan ko ng konti yung batas. Ngunit hindi lamang isang mambabatas ang taong ito, kaya napakahirap na puriin. Marahil sa kabuuan ng kasaysayan ng ating bayan, buhat nung tayo ay maging malayang bayan, ay nagbibigay ng lingning at liwanag ang buhay ni Jovito Salonga. Noong panahon ng kadilim ang ating pakikibaka sa mga mananakop na Hapon, sa isang batang gerilyero, marahil ay hindi pa nabubuhay si Sagisag noon. Buhay ka na ba noong panahon ng Hapon? Ngunit si Ka Jovi ay muntik nang mamatay. Napit sa Fort Santiago, binugbog, pinalo. Mayroon nga isang naging dakilang presidente, sabi nakulong din siya sa Fort Santiago, hindi pala naman totoo. Pagkatapos niyan, nung ibinango natin ang ating constitutional government, we became for the first time a real independent republic. We needed men like Jovi, with democratic vision and enduring capacity in building this institution of freedom. Pagkat tayo nung araw galing tayo sa giyera, napakahirap ng ating republika. At saka, ilan-ilan yung talagang masisinot na pinag-aaral ng mabuti ang pagbabalangkas ng batas at pagpapatibay ng ating constitutional system and liberties. Kung babasahin ninyo ang sinulat ni Jovito Salonga, makikita ninyong hindi isang politiko, but a real constitutional and democratic spirit. Nag-aaral din po ako ng konti ng batas. Ngunit ang alam kong katulad ni Drilon ay nag-aral din sa panan ni Ka Jovito Salonga. Pagkat marami sa atin, ang Gara, marahil si Manong, ay nag-aral kay Jovito Salonga. Estudyante tayong lahat niya. Marahil nagpupunta tayo nung araw sa Senado pang marinig lamang natin ang kanyang diskurso. And later, of course, in the dark struggle when democracy was dimmed by a homemade dictator, Jovito Salonga, after having suffered multiple wounds in a Plaza Miranda bombing, I was already a full-grown man, and in the front of the struggle, have been an inspiration. Hindi pwedeng, nung naroon sa Amerika, hindi tumatawag yan. Ano ba itong nangyayari sa Pilipinas na mayroong bombahan? Tatanong niya sa amin, may kinalaman ba rito ang movement? Kung nihinayak yun ang movement, siyempre sasabihin ko, wala. Nasa Amerika kami. Ngunit hindi natigil sa kanya ang marubdob na pagmamahal sa bayan. Sa kanyang pagsusulong ng mga kaisipang gawin niyong lahat kung kami man, ang aming henerasyon ay hindi makabalik at hindi maibalik ang demokrasya, kayo. Natutuwa nga ako nung sabihin niyang, ang lawak ng dalampasigan ng ating arkipelago. Parang ang gusto niyang sabihin ay, maaaring dumating ang araw na ang mga Pilipinong 3 milyon dito sa Amerika ay lumusob. Ngunit bukod dyan ay hindi siya nahinto ng pagsusulat. At ang karamihan na sinusulat niya ay nililimbag ko. Ikinakalat ko doon sa samahan naming Movement for a Free Philippines. Ginagamit ko sa aking lobby sa US Congress upang putulin ang military aid. Ngunit yung taong ito na kinupkup ng Amerika at dinakila ang demokrasya ng Amerika ay lalong higit ng pagmamahal sa sariling bayan sapagkat nung dumating ang ating kalayaan at ang ating kapangyarihan, kasama mga ilan rito, pinutol nila ang kapangyarihan ng Amerika dito sa Pilipinas. Hininto ang military bases. Napakahirap na dakilain ng isang taong katulad ni Jovito Salonga. Nasa kanyang tapang, nasa kanyang dunong, nasa kanyang pagmamahal sa bayan. At ang kanyang buhay ay gumuhit sa maraming panahon. Ngayong meron tayong kalayaan, marahil, si Jovito Salonga ay bahagi ng buhay ng ating kalayaan. Maraming salamat po.
The Honorable Wigberto E. Tanyada will now deliver his eulogy.
Our dear colleague, friend, and mentor, Senator Jovito Salonga, lived a meaningful and purposeful life. He lived to be 95, but he retained a vigorous and youthful spirit because, as he said in a speech delivered sometime in 1998 entitled Parangal sa mga kabataang tumatanda, he said, "You are as young as your hopes, as old as your fears, as young as your faith, and as old as your doubts." Senator Salonga lived a simple and principled life. He was a man of prayer, of deep faith. He was a scholar who taught law inside the classroom and practiced law in the dark days of martial law, when the rule of law had been shackled and put aside. What was truly inspiring, given his life story, was that he never gave up. He was, for many of us, always a beacon of hope. Born in 1920 from parents with modest means, his father was a pastor and his mother a market vendor. And Jovi sold ice drop in the market area. Bata pa lamang si Jovi, siya ay Mr. Palengke na. He was a working student, proofreading to earn a living while studying at the UP College of Law. His preparations for the bar exams were interrupted by the war, and when he finally took them, he topped the bar exam together with the late Senator Pepe Diokno with a grade of 95.3. This was how Jovito Salonga remembered his experience during the war years. And I quote, "I recall that as a young man of 21, I joined the resistance, the underground resistance movement, was eventually captured, then repeatedly tortured in Pasig in the presence of my father, transferred to Fort Santiago and to 3 other jails, then sentenced by a Japanese military tribunal to 15 years of hard labor in Muntinlupa. I was later released during the Foundation Day of Japan." End of quote. After the war, Jovito Salonga embarked on a scholarly career, earning his master's degree at Harvard and his doctorate at Yale University. Soon after, he taught and practiced law and became dean of college of the Far Eastern University before he was persuaded to run for Congress in Rizal, 2nd District, in 1991. Jovito Salonga ran for senator thrice in 1965, 1971, and 1987, and topped the senatorial race thrice. Throughout his public life, he was the epitome of the servant leader, as he served the people with utmost integrity, loyalty, and justice. Hindi lang po salita ng salita, kundi may kasamang palaging gawa. Kaya't masasabi natin nang walang pag-aalinlangan na sa kanyang buong paglilingkod sa ating inang bayan at sa sambayanang Pilipino, tinahak na ni Senador Salonga ang daang matuwid. Jovito Salonga suffered in the flesh for his beliefs. In 1971, he nearly died as a bomb blast ripped through the stage during the Liberal Party's proclamation rally at Plaza Miranda. But he was a determined man and could not be discouraged nor deterred. As Jovi himself put it, and I quote him again, when Marcos imposed martial law in September 1972, I was among the earliest to oppose it openly and publicly. I handled the cases of well-known as well as obscure political detainees. I was persecuted, arrested, and thrown into the same isolation room where Ninoy Aquino had been in prison for more than 7 years and a half of his memorable life. End of quote. As Senate President, Jovito Salonga presided over the Senate's finest hour. Before he banged the gavel to signal the defeat of the U.S. military bases treaty, he explained his decisive vote thus: I have been warned by well-meaning friends that my stand on this treaty may hurt my chances of becoming president. No matter. That is an insignificant consequence. In times of great crisis, our martyrs and heroes offered their lives that our people might become truly free. After walking through the valley of the shadow of death twice in my life, titles and positions do not mean that much to me anymore. What is more important is to be of real service to our people, with or without any position in government. September 16, 1991 may well be the day when we in the Senate found the soul, the true spirit of this nation, because we mustered the courage and the will to declare the end of foreign military presence in the Philippines. Therefore, I vote no to this treaty. He then announced by a vote of 12 to 11 that treaty is defeated. Kaugnay po ng makasaysayang pangyayaring ito, naalala ko po yung sinabi sa akin ng aking tatay, si dating Senador Lorenzo M. Tanyada. Masayang-masaya po sinabi niya sa akin, inabot ko pa, nagwagi tayo, kamayan mo silang lahat, unahin mo si Salonga. A few months after that historic victory, Jovito Salonga was deposed as Senate President on December 1991 and lost his bid for the presidency in May of 1992, coming in 6th in a field of 7 candidates. He was defeated by President Ramos and Senator Santiago, Speaker Ramon Mitra, Dandinko Wangco, and Imelda Marcos even got more votes than him. In his reflections on his stewardship of the Senate entitled "The Senate That Said No," Jovi wrote, and I quote, "For if the supreme test of courage is to suffer defeat without losing heart, the greatest test of faith is to suffer loss without giving up our vision for tomorrow. The vision of a free, independent, just, and progressive Philippines." Even after he stepped down from political life, Jovi continued to serve as a citizen with a conscience, encouraging the emergence of efforts such as Kilos Bayan, Bantay Katarungan, and Bantayog ng mga bayani. Allow me to end with a few thoughts on Jovito Salonga's legacy of moral courage. He was a friend to many of us in the halls of the Senate, and his was the kind of friendship which evoked and sustained moral courage. In writing about the late Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Pedro Yap, his best friend of 65 years, who passed away more than a decade ago, and whose activist son, Emmanuel Yap, disappeared on the 14th of February 1976 after visiting his parents' home on Bohol Avenue, never to be seen again, causing grief beyond belief. Jovi writes about the courage of his friend, which in a sense also sums up his life. And I quote, "The significance of his life may be found in his great moral courage before, during, and after martial rule. For courage is one virtue which, in the words of Winston Churchill, makes all the other virtues possible." End of quote. In saying goodbye to Jovito Salonga, who brought dignity, honor, and prestige to this institution, allow me to share a prayer. May the good Lord inspire us all and instill in us the moral courage to do the right things for our people, to serve them always humbly and honestly, to make hard choices, putting our people's welfare above all and our nation's interests always. Paalam, Senador Salonga. Mananatiling buhay ang iyong alaala at pamana. Hindi ka namin malilimutan. Sana matutunan at matularan ng marami nating mamamayan ang inyong ipinakita at pinatunayang katapangan, katapatan, kagitingan at kabayanihan sa inyong tuluyang pagtataguyod, pagsusulong at pagtatanggol ng ating pambansang kasarinlan, kalayaan, kapakanan at dignidad. Maraming pong salamat sa inyong lahat.
The Honorable Edgardo J. Angara will now deliver his eulogy.
When we opened the 8th Congress, 8th Senate, we opened it in the old Congress, not in this hall. It was a Gothic building, very impressive, very dignified. And I, as a
new senator was really old. And I admired the 24 who was moving towards inside the room. There were great names, almost storied names. Salonga, Gingona, Sotero Laurel, Sanios Menya, Raul Manglapus. And then those who are new in politics, Rene, Joey, Vic Siga, Sonny Alvarez. And formidable names like Ernie Maceda and Mike Tamano. And two really outstanding women leaders of the country, Letty and Nina. We were all impressed, and I think the nation was all impressed with this 24-member body. The mood was, I think, very hopeful, very optimistic. And the Salonga Senate, if I recall, was generally a tranquil body, almost joyful, which is quite not descriptive of the Senate. Full of hope. Why? Because of our leader. It's a leader that we all look up to. And in his acceptance speech when we elected him Senate President, and I thought I will add to the summary of Joey's life and times. Let me add what he said when he accepted the Senate presidency. He said to all of us, and I quote, "We have the moral obligation to perform, to advance the cause of good government, and to bring prosperity and security to our people, so that we may have here, in the fullness of time, a free society where the weak shall be strong, and the strong shall be just," unquote. It's almost Platonic and biblical in language. But Platonic because I remember what Rene said when Jovi's death was announced. He was the philosopher king this country missed. And so, with an inspiring and optimistic leader like him, it was, I repeat, quite a joyful, relatively joyful Senate. And we recall he will now and then invite us to Pansol. Remember that, Letty? Pansol, and we will have almost like a Socratic dialogue, question and answer. That's the type of leader Jovi was. Inspirational, Socratic, question and answer. But very humble, very humble. I think if there's one character trait among the many wonderful traits he possesses, it's humility. It's like a Gandhian humility. As Gandhi said, to achieve great things, to find the truth, one must be as humble as the dust. Jovi was like that. And if we bring him to contemporary times, he is not unlike Arpo, he led through humility. He's a leader, a humble leader, an example to the powerful. So that's what I recall about Jovi. And the Salonga years, I believe, laid the foundation for what we are enjoying now. I think very few people realize that in the 5 years he presided over this body, he initiated and restored and reinstated and re-strengthened our education systems, our health system, good governance, the ombudsman and the ethical conduct of public officials, social housing, agrarian reform. Those were passed during the Salonga era. And that foundation, when Jovi took over in 1987, and I got the figure from our budget office here, the per head, per capita income was 13,000 pesos. When his term ended, it doubled to almost 24. Of course, much higher now because the GDP has grown almost 5 times now than then. But just to emphasize that his quiet but effective, humble, not loud leadership led to the laying down of that foundation that now provides us the promise of what he said, prosperity and security to our people, so that one day, in the fullness of time, we will have a free society where the weak shall be strong and the strong shall be just. And so, to the family of Jovi, to Steve, and the siblings, our deepest condolences, our sympathies, and our affection for a mentor, for a true patriot, for a scholar that we all remember and will remember very well. Maraming pong salamat.
The Honorable Lauren B. Ligarda will now deliver her eulogy.
Senate President Frank Drilon, former Senate presidents, former senators, incumbent senators, congressmen, friends of the Salonga family, Steve, Ricky, Eddie, Patricia, Victoria, your spouses, Pearlie, my comadre. I did not have a chance to be with Senate President Salonga in the Senate because I became a senator when he was already an ex-Senate president and a former presidential candidate. But therefore, I am greatly honored and humbled to be allowed to deliver a brief eulogy for this great Filipino. I had a chance to encounter him and come up close and personal with the man even while I was a young journalist, and had the many chances of interviewing him and documenting him in my 20 years in television. I also had the chance to be up close and personal in one-on-one meetings with him when I was a very young first-term senator. And not many people know that I sought his advice, his mentorship, his wisdom on the very difficult decisions I had to make in the Senate. Today we pay tribute to a man whose towering greatness shaped much of the politics and public affairs of the 20th century, untied the umbilical cord with the United States, and shepherded the passage of landmark, life-changing legislation. Former Senate President Jovito Salonga was for me a dear, affectionate friend, a mentor and advisor, a family friend. His eldest son, Steve, is a godfather, a ninong of my eldest son, Lance. He is also an outstanding public servant, a statesman of the highest order, a pillar of democracy, an indefatigable fighter for truth and justice, whose brilliance and integrity are unparalleled. Like many of the great men and women of his day and age, Jovito Salonga was born under the humblest of circumstances. His father, as mentioned by Senator Tañada, was Esteban, a Methodist pastor, while his mother, Bernardita, had to sell wares at the public market to augment the limited family income from missionary work. However, with a superb intellect, despite his life's circumstances, he was a star student at the University of the Philippines Law, was one of the few Filipinos in the 1940s to attend Harvard and Yale University. And as mentioned earlier, he topped the bar with 95.3, an amazing feat from a man who a year before was tortured by the Japanese military because of his engagement in anti-Japanese activities and was sentenced to prison for 15 years of hard labor, only to be pardoned a year after. His devotion to our nation's freedom has allowed each one of us to stand here today in this august hall to argue and to agree, to debate and to collaborate, and to help run our nation. He vigorously opposed the dictatorship in 1972 and defended cases that both involved well-known political prisoners as well as obscure political detainees. Perhaps one of the most iconic and proudest moments of the Philippine Senate in contemporary times was a day when Senate President Salonga broke the 11-11 tie in the stalemated vote on the RP-US Basis Treaty in 1991 in that, what Ed said, Gothic chamber, and I was a young journalist then covering him. As he banged the gavel to announce the Senate's decision to scrap the treaty and effectively end an era, he snapped the seemingly unbreakable cord with the United States of America. Seldom does a chamber of Congress get this rare chance to help rewrite the history of the nation, which Salonga and the Magnificent 11 precisely did in 1991. It was in this circumstance, much later, that I was able to closely work with then former Senate President Salonga, when I actually personally consulted him about the many contentious provisions that I could not live with in the Visiting Forces Agreement between the Philippines and the United States in my first term in 1998. Manong Tito, Raul Rocco, Manong Nene, Serge Osmeña, and myself. We may have lost in the vote, but I think we did the right thing. Not many know that I consulted Manong Jovi in this, and I believe and continue to believe that our decision was right. Thus, my vote against the VFA in 1999. Since then, Senator Salonga was also at the helm of many groups, as mentioned earlier, Kilos Bayan, Bantay Katarungan. Kilos Bayan was a forum raising political consciousness and citizens' participation in governance, and I would be honored to have been invited by the esteemed former Senate President, and I would join him in his office and in the fora in, I think, Mandaluyong. I would also join him in the Shalom Center here, and he would encourage me to speak about the issues close to my heart, and so I spoke about the environment as early as 20 years ago. And at this fora, Senator Salonga helped me spread my advocacies for the environment and helped me transition from a mere believer in environmental causes to an aggressive and proactive public advocate. Thank you po, Manong Jovi. Senator Salonga lived long enough to see the outcome of his fight for freedom. We, today's political leaders, should struggle mightily and hard to be true keepers, ardent torchbearers of his work and his legacy. I will end my tribute to a great patriot with his own words, and I would like to quote, "Freedom is a bedrock of human dignity, the one value we should never compromise or surrender. Freedom is a catalyst in all our efforts towards national development. It is a precondition and the objective of our collective endeavor. For a nation of sheep can never be great." Thank you.
The Secretary of the Senate will now read the Senate resolution.
Republic of the Philippines, Congress of the Philippines, Senate Resolution number 118. Resolution expressing the profound sympathy and sincere condolence of the Senate of the Philippines on the death of its beloved former President, the Honorable Jovito R. Salonga. Whereas Honorable Jovito R. Salonga, a patriot and nationalist, former Senate President, three-time top-notcher in senatorial elections, former member of the House of Representatives, first chairman of the Presidential Commission on Good Government, PCGG, former law dean, author, bar top-notcher, and an outstanding public servant, passed away on 10 March 2016 at the age of 95. Whereas born on 22 June 1920 to humble parents, Esteban Salonga, a Presbyterian pastor, and Bernardita Reyes, a market vendor, the young Jovito from Pasig Rizal grew up to become an outstanding student and champion debater and orator at the University of the Philippines College of Law, joined the guerrilla movement during World War II, was incarcerated, tortured, and later freed by the Japanese. Whereas he was a top-notcher in the 1944 bar examinations with a grade of 95.3%, and then pursued his graduate studies in the United States on scholarship grants, earning his Master of Laws, LLM, from Harvard Law School in 1948, and Doctor of the Science of Law, JSD, from Yale Law School in 1949. Whereas in 1961, at the peak of his law practice and teaching career, he ran and was elected representative of the 2nd District of Rizal and distinguished himself as chairman of the Legal Committee at the Anglo-Philippine Talks and the powerful Committee on Good Government, which investigated the celebrated Stonehill case.
whereas despite the lack of financial means, he would run and top the senatorial elections held in 1965 and would repeat this feat during the 1971 and 1987 senatorial races, thus distinguishing himself as the only person in the history of Philippine politics who emerged at the top of 3 senatorial elections. Whereas when martial law was imposed on 21 September 1972, he was among those who openly and vigorously opposed the closure of Congress and the imposition of one-man rule, and would serve as counsel to prominent opposition leaders arrested and detained during the dictatorship. Whereas he was then implicated in a series of bombings in Metro Manila, he was arrested and incarcerated in the same isolation room where Ninoy Aquino was imprisoned. But he was allowed to live with his wife in March 1981 to attend several international conferences and undergo medical procedures in the United States, where they were later forced to live in self-exile in Hawaii and California as subversion charges were filed against him. Whereas he returned to the Philippines on 21 January 1985 to help unite the democratic opposition, and when President Corazon C. Aquino assumed power in 1986, he was appointed PCGG chairman, and as such, he had accomplished the recovery of ill-gotten wealth consisting of billions of cash and bank deposits and several titles to real property and their turnover to the government. Whereas when a restored Congress opened its sessions on 27 July 1987 under a constitutional democracy, he was elected Senate President by his peers, who saw in him a respected leader with an untainted record in public service, a leadership which combines power and conscience, authority, and selflessness. Whereas on 16 September 1991, he led a group of 12 senators who rejected the extension of the RP-US military base agreement and ended several years of foreign military presence in the country. Whereas a 2007 Ramon Magsaysay awardee for government service and a recipient of numerous international and local academic and civic awards and citations, Senator Salonga left an indelible mark of his statesmanship, authoring vital measures such as the State Scholarship Law, the Disclosure of Interest Act, the Magna Carta for public school teachers, the Code of Conduct and Ethical Standards for public officials and employees, the Anti-Coup d'etat Act, and the Act defining and penalizing the crime of plunder. Whereas he founded the Bantayog ng Bayani Foundation, a private entity that honors the nation's martyrs who fought and sacrificed their lives against the tyranny of dictatorship, and after his retirement from politics, organized the Kilos Bayan and Bantay Katarungan, both independent, non-partisan, ethics-oriented organizations that seek to improve governance in public service and the administration of justice in the country. Whereas the members of this august chamber joined the whole nation and his family in their moment of bereavement over the departure of an extraordinary leader and statesman who served as a shepherd, who eased the fears of a people transiting from dictatorship to democracy, and who stood as a bright lamp that rekindled a nation's nationalist fervor. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate of the Philippines to express, as it hereby expresses its profound sympathy and sincere condolence on the death of its beloved President, the Honorable Jovito Salonga. Resolve further that a copy of this resolution be furnished the bereaved family of the Honorable Jovito Salonga. Signed, Franklin M. Drilon, President of the Senate. Signed, Oscar G. Yabes, Senate Secretary.
The Senate President, together with the other senators, will now present the resolution to the family of the late Senator Salonga. The Honorable Franklin M. Drilon, Senate President, will now deliver his eulogy.
Former Senate Presidents present here, former senators, my colleagues, congressmen, friends, family of the late Senate President Jovito Salonga. This morning, with hearts gripped by profound sorrow, we are gathered in this august chamber to pay our last respects to a great statesman whose uncommon valor, brilliance, and integrity captivated generations of Filipinos. In his lifetime, Jovito Salonga blazed trails and created new pathways. He always took the high road and pursued excellence in a principled manner. He topped the bar examinations, as well as 3 Senate elections in 1965, 1971, and 1987. Take note that Jovito Salonga topped the Senate elections in 3 different decades, the 1960s, the 1970s, and in the 1980s. Only Jovi could have done that, nobody else. Nobody in the history of this country has ever done what Jovi did in the political field. As a member of this august chamber, he dazzled his political friends and foes alike by his brilliant oratory while defending the national sovereignty and national interest. He neither bended his principles nor surrendered his dignity, even if he was subjected to the spirit-breaking conditions, such as when he was arrested, detained, and tortured by the Japanese during the Second World War, and during his arrest and detention during martial law. Even the 1971 Plaza Miranda bombing, which left him seriously injured, did not diminish his fervor and determination to fight for what he believed was right for the country and his people. He courageously walked through the valley of shadow and death to help restore democracy in our country. Among his many outstanding traits as a leader was his fierce loyalty to our country. When he voted against the RP U.S. Bases Treaty in 1991, he was a politician guided by principle rather than expediency. I recall that I was then the executive secretary, and we held a rally with President Cory Aquino in Luneta. It rained. Cory, however, led us to walk through the rain, went to the office of then Senate President Salonga, and in the presence of many senators, Cory pleaded her case, President Cory pleaded her case for the ratification of the U.S. Bases Treaty. Jovi held his ground. He showed much respect to President Cory Aquino, but firmly and politely maintained his principle that the Senate he cannot support the ratification of the RP U.S. Bases Treaty. The rest is history. To borrow the words of General Luna, bayan muna bago ang sarili. That sums up the way Jovis lived his life. Bayan muna, bago ang sarili. He set the standard for public service by leading a simple life marked by honor, humility, and integrity. At the Senate, he sowed the seeds of good governance and passed many laws that today continue to shape our nation. Principal among these is the anti-plunder law that he wrote and authored. A pastor's son, Jovis' deep faith in God sustained him during the lowest times of his political life. His noble heart and character showed when he accepted the results of the 1992 presidential election with no bitterness or rancor, a trait which is so difficult to find today. Even if all his life he prepared himself to lead our nation, he calmly accepted that the presidency may not be his destiny. Even after he retired from politics, he continued serving the Filipino people through Kilos Bayan, Bantayog ng mga Bayani Foundation, and the Bantay Katulong. As a young senator, I would be frequently summoned by Jovi to have breakfast in his house. I remember the orange juice that we would always drink for breakfast in his house. Indeed, those were happy times when, as Ed Angara said, it was a question and answer session. And indeed, I was peppered by a lot of questions of Jovi during those breakfasts that we had. Senator Jovito Salonga indeed is a mentor, and I am fortunate to have met him and shared his friendship. 15 years ago, Jovi recruited and inducted me into the Liberal Party. To belong to the same institution and political party with this giant of a man is indeed a great honor. Senator Jovito Reyes Salonga belonged to a rare breed of mankind, a politician with scruples and a leader with principles. His life and work inspired me and the legion of his admirers to emulate him. Let it not be forgotten that once in this august chamber, there was a Jovito Salonga whose sweet brilliance and undying love for his motherland held this country in awe. To the Filipino youth who are now enjoying the freedom that generations before them paid for with their life and limb, may the life of Jovito Salonga inspire you to protect our hard-won democracy. Let me quote a passage from the poem A Sum of Life by the great American poet Henry Longfellow. Quote, "Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind us footprints on the sands of time." End of quote. Leaders and politicians come and go, but only few leave deep footprints in the sands of time like Jovito Reyes Salonga. He will always be remembered as a man of great courage, honor, and integrity. He may have gone ahead of us, but his legacy lives on. We therefore join the Salonga family and the whole nation in mourning his passing, but we are also comforted with the thought that Jovi is now with his beloved wife, resting in the bosom of our great Creator. Farewell, Jovi. Thank you for the privilege of knowing you and sharing a space in our nation's political life with you. Thank you for giving the best years of your life to our motherland. You will live forever in our heart and in the heart of our grateful nation. Paalam.
On behalf of the family of the late Senator Jovito R. Salonga, Mr. Esteban Salonga will deliver the response.
Mr. President, good morning. And good morning to everyone who has taken the time to join us this morning. On behalf of my elder brother, Ricky, my sister, Patty, my brother, Eddie, my sister, Rena, on behalf of my own family, my wife, Girlie, and our children, Ricky's children, Patty's children, we would like to thank the Senate for giving us an opportunity to hear once more these wonderful stories about our father. Senator Salonga loved this chamber. He lived most of his life attempting to shape the Senate into something that he thought the country might be proud of. During the many, many years that we suffered through martial law, there were times when he himself thought that we would never see these days. So that when in 1987 it fell to him to reorganize the Senate in a way that would be hopeful for the future of freedom and democracy in the Philippines, he took on that task with an almost religious fervor. Today, as we give thanks to the Senate, I know that aside from the former senators who have served him, in this audience are many who first began their careers in the Senate in that first 1987 Senate. And I know that all these praises that have enlarged our hearts is also meant for all of them who made it possible for you to praise it today. For he was not just one man trying to revive the glory of the Senate. He was behind him many, many men and women and members of our family who worked just as fervently to make it happen. And it is for them, and it is in their behalf that we say our deepest thanks. Bobby, Rene, Vic, Lauren, Ninang Lorna, so many familiar friends. Ed, that was fantastic. Thank you. All of this will be remembered in a publication where we will try to publish everyone's eulogies. I have 2 emails from Arnold Zeitlin and now Ambassador John Maisto, very close family friends of ours, who were his collaborators during the end of the martial law era. many faces we have to thank today. And we share with you all these honors, especially Tito. We went through some very hard times with Nene, Bing. And I suppose all these praises, all these words that give honor is shared by every one of the senators who have worked with him. Mula po sa kaibuturan ng aming puso, nagpapasalamat po kami sa inyong paghandog at paggawad nitong napakabuting puri na tinanggap niya. Maraming salamat po.
This necrological service is hereby declared closed.